In this video, I'm going to share with you 10 timeless tips to help you get better results as a designer by improving your process and raising your typography game. Let's go! Hello and welcome back to Flux Academy, the online design school. My name is Matt Brunton, and one Saturday I was out with my family looking for furniture in an antique store and we didn't find any, but I did find this book from 1961, which of course I had to buy. Now this did not impress my wife much, but I think designer friends, you might be a little bit more intrigued by what's inside. This book was written prior to the advent of digital design, over 60 years ago. So can this kind of advice still be relevant today? Well, I'm going to say yes when the designer is Aaron Burns. Here he is pictured in the blue shirt. Born in 1922, he worked with Herbert Luebelin, who is pictured with here. He co-founded the International Typeface Corporation, taught typographic design at the Pratt Institute, was awarded a Type Directors Club medal, is inducted into the New York Art Directors Hall of Fame. There's quite a list, and we can see some of the work included in this book just to give you a flavour of it. Really interesting but different typographical treatments in these advertisements and these corporate logos and monograms. And so what? I hear you cry. Well, I've extracted 10 tips from this book that can help you as a designer today. The first half will challenge your design process, and the second half are more specifically to do with typography and typesetting. So have you got your notebook ready? Number one, examine the words to find the solution. The creative idea that is going to come through in your design to really make it sing is found within the words. So it's so important to get this right. When it comes to branding, I prefer to work on the whole project and be involved in the brand strategy, because that is where the identity design ideas come, when you're in that strategic process and you're thinking hard about the problem. He says this in his book, Aaron Burns. Get into the habit of thinking seriously about the typewritten copy that you have in your hand. Learn to examine the words themselves in order to find some key that will guide you to a solution of the problem. And it's often in really studying those words, thinking about keywords or thinking about the copy that you've got to hand, that the idea comes to mind. Number two, tell the story. Tell the story graphically through your design layout. It's really important to have a narrative, not just a bunch of elements arranged in a layout. There's a great example here of something pretty innocuous, a company moving to a new address. But by thinking about this problem, here it is, new address in New York, they have been able to develop this clever little solution where it looks like the arrows of signs and also the layout of a road to be able to demonstrate this idea. So tell the story through what you're doing. Have some sort of point of view, some sort of narrative, some sort of journey for the audience, and your work will have that much more impact. Number three, work backwards. That means beginning with the end in mind. Burns says in his book, learn to work backwards, know the time problem and mechanical requirements before you begin. In other words, get everything arranged about the project, about deadlines, what will be required before you start. If you're working on a website, think about what are the business goals, and then work backwards from that in terms of what should be included in the website, what you want users to do before you then get to the design stage, rather than just making something that looks pretty. When it comes to branding, it's again about knowing what the positioning is going to be, what the goals are, and then thinking about their important deliverables. I always like to ask clients, where is this brand going to appear? And so by figuring that out, you have that in mind from the beginning and you can design towards that end goal. That style guide, those guidelines, are not something you just do at the end of a branding project with whatever you've got, but something you always have in mind. What are the elements, what are the parts and pieces I'm going to need that are going to help me arrive at the right solution and fit the client's requirements and what they're going to need going forwards. And a similar related is this next point, number 4, gather all elements beforehand. It's important to get all the imagery and everything that you need before you start. That's going to produce the best result, although you might not think it's always practical, but I love the way Burns puts it. Stop saying to yourself that you will juggle all the typing later. The time to do the planning is in the first layout stage, allowing enough room for all type to fit in safely and fairly accurately. Know all the elements to be included. Have the illustrative matter beforehand. Know the actual wording of heads. Don't put lorem ipsum in for a heading. Have a heading that you're working with. If you absolutely can't get one from the client or the copywriter, whomever you're working with, then write your own headings. They really bring personality, and they bring context to the layout that you're producing. Get the imagery together, work on that. A photograph can make such a difference to a layout, so knowing what you're working with really helps. I know you might be in situations where you're just being asked to do something, but you want to develop over your career where you can explain to your line manager, your employer, your client, the art director, whomever you're working with, that this is a better approach, and get yourself into the position where you can plan your own projects this way. Number 5, remove unnecessary elements. Evaluate your elements. Eliminate everything that isn't absolutely necessary. Simplify, simplify, simplify. I think it's even easier today in digital design and using software to just drag things around and bring in elements, and clients might encourage us to fill that white space, and add things in, but removing everything that doesn't belong allows you to be dramatic with what you have left and produces a much better result. There's a great example of this in this book, which is just a little advertisement, and stripped out all the details. You can see on this right hand page we have these 2 quotes, and there's one larger block and one smaller block, and it suggests a conversation, and it doesn't need a photograph of 2 people talking. It doesn't need speech bubbles, even any sort of characters. It doesn't need the names of the people. Just by the way it is typeset, we get the feeling of a casual conversation. All the unnecessary elements have been removed. It's a much cleaner, classier way of doing it. Number 6, visual puns are great when they work. So I encourage you not to shoehorn everything into some sort of visual pun. Sometimes with logos, people are always trying to make them have 7 hidden meanings, and it's not necessary. But when something comes together and it works and it hits home, it can be that little delightful moment. These examples here, this pair of examples of sleep, where these tired eyes appear for the E's in the middle, or dead. This one I particularly like, with the D lying down on the end. And this is another example of that, examining the words to find the solution. And sometimes when these things just work and seem obvious, then that's when you should use it. When you're trying to force it, you don't need to force it. Number 7, function is more important than form, which is more important than fashion. Or I like the way Burns says it. In typography, function is of major importance. Form is secondary. Fashion is almost meaningless. So what is the function of typography? Well, almost always it is to be read. Now, sometimes it can have just a stylistic form, and you can use it as a decorative element, and sometimes legibility is not as important, but most of the time type is there to be read, so it needs to be legible. So you need to know how to achieve legibility. That is a primary thing, and that's not necessarily done just by making type bigger. I mean, I've created a little example here with 3 columns. So in the first column, the type is maybe not that legible. So in the second one, we have made it larger. However, it's still some issues with legibility. In the third column, the type is just as small as the first column with the identical point size, but we've increased the leading from 100% to 140%. That's the line height, the vertical distance between the lines. And it becomes more legible. So small type, and Burns makes this point, is not necessarily difficult to read. It just might not be set with the correct leading. Equally, it could be something like contrast. Do you have good enough contrast between the colour of the type and the background? It could be white space around the type. It could be other elements that are competing that are making it difficult to read. It could be that it's not a very legible face to begin with and you need to select a different font. So just making it bigger might not be the solution. So you need to have these skills and be aware of them and be able to execute them quickly as a designer. So function, it's about legibility, it's about hierarchy, so you can lead the user through a journey, you can help contextualize people. Then next comes form. So there is a place in typography for form, for things being aesthetically beautiful, and obviously certain fonts are more pleasing than others, and some of that is objective, some of that might be a little bit subjective, but fashion comes final. And there's so much about design trends, you know, even on YouTube and that kind of thing, but it's meaningless in typography. It's function and then form, and if you have something that's beautiful, there's no dated. I mean, Burns again makes this point elsewhere. I remember reading, saying that no good typeface is dated. It's never out of date. It's never old-fashioned. If it's a really well-designed font in the first place, there's always going to be a time when it's appropriate. And if it's typeset well, then function and form can be achieved, and don't worry so much about fashion. Number 8, select an appropriate typeface. So you need to take into consideration a few things when you are choosing fonts, and Burns makes some great points about this for in his context when most of the work was print, and he says that we should take into consideration things like the nature of the message, and that's really important. It needs to be appropriate to what's being said, so you need to read and understand the words and understand the context of where this thing is going to live. You need to think about the kind of artwork that will accompany it, the process and paper on which it will be reproduced, or maybe just the setting, the final media, whatever that's going to be for you. Other typefaces that will appear in the same layout, do they pair and combine well? The media to be used, similar to our point about paper, whether the type will stand alone or compete with other messages in surrounding environments, and considering colour, legibility, general style, size. So having all these things in mind, some typefaces like display faces look great when they are huge as a big headline in a magazine spread, but if you try and make that small body copy on the web, not going to work so well. Think about like a serif font with a big contrast between thicks and thins. That's not going to read well when it's very small on the web. So thinking about where it's going to live and it being the right feel will help you select better typefaces. And related to that, number 9, learn to pair fonts. There's a really simple example of all the examples in this book really showcase this, but here, this example on page 64, which we can zoom in on, we have a serif headline and then a sans serif body copy, and that itself is a easy way of doing a combination with nice contrast by choosing a serif for one and a sans serif for the other with headline and body copy. And then when we have an item in bold, you can see there's a clear difference in weight between the main body copy and this section which has been emphasized with the company name. And when you pair fonts within a typeface, you want to go up at least 2 weights, so from regular to bold. Don't use regular and medium, use at least regular to bold, or light to bold, or regular to black. And having a little bit more of a contrast there makes it clearer to the eye. And finally, number 10, make it look good. A little bit cheeky this one, but Burns says it more eloquently. There should be no rule except to make typography pleasing to the eye. All these things we've talked about, they're not rules, they're tips that can help you get there faster. They are principles about your approach, but not necessarily hard and fast rules. And at the end of the day, it's developing our taste and developing our eye and getting better at seeing things, and so that we can develop a more refined aesthetic. We understand what works and what doesn't, but often by learning these principles, they help us get to the point where we can see those things a lot quicker and a lot more instinctively. I've worked with some brilliant art directors who can look at a layout in a flash and analyze what's right with it and what's wrong with it and how to move forward. And that's where we want to get to as designers and art directors and creative directors. But remember, at the end of the day, not to be constrained by rules, but to learn the rules so that you understand what's going on. And then from a place of knowledge and experience, you can break them. Which of these 10 tips on typography and approach to design particularly stuck out to you? Let us know down in the comments. We're all about following a proven process here at Flux Academy, because that's what helps you deliver consistent results. So that's what we teach on our web design and our brand design courses, a proven process. Links in the description as always. Hope you enjoyed discovering this book as much as I did. It's been another reminder for me that trends come and go, but principles are timeless. Until next time, happy designing.